Dog and her puppies left to freeze in a blizzard. Then the unthinkable happens. The wind howled mercilessly across the open field, carrying with it a stinging mix of snow and ice. The storm had been raging for hours, blanketing the small rural town in a thick layer of white. Most residents were huddled inside their warm homes, their fires crackling and lights glowing through frosted windows. But out in the bitter cold, hidden beneath a crumbling shed on the outskirts of town, a mother dog lay curled tightly around her newborn puppies. Her once glossy coat was matted with frost, and her breaths came in shallow, ragged bursts. Each exhale created a small puff of steam that quickly disappeared into the freezing air. She nudged her pups closer, trying to shield them from the biting wind that cut through the gaps in the dilapidated structure. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny bodies trembling against their mother's warmth. They were too young to understand the danger they were in, too weak to cry out for help. The mother dog let out a low, mournful whine, her instincts urging her to protect her litter at all costs, even as her own strength began to wane. Miles away, a young woman named Claire was pacing in her living room. She was a veterinarian and had spent most of the day caring for animals brought in by worried owners before the storm worsened. As she stared out the window at the blizzard raging outside, a nagging feeling tugged at her chest. "I can't shake the feeling that there's someone out there," she muttered to herself. Her German shepherd, Jasper, lay at her feet, his ears perking up at the sound of her voice. Claire crouched down, scratching behind his ears. "What do you think, boy? Am I overthinking it?" Jasper's response was a sharp bark, as if to say, "Trust your gut." As the storm showed no sign of letting up, Claire couldn't shake the thought that an animal might be out there, struggling to survive. She grabbed her coat and boots, ignoring the icy wind that blasted her face as she stepped outside. Jasper trotted at her side, his nose to the ground. The two of them trudged through the snow, their footprints quickly disappearing in the storm. Claire called out into the night, her voice carried away by the wind. "Hello? Anyone out here?" For a moment, there was nothing but the relentless howl of the blizzard. Then Jasper froze, his ears perked and his body tense. He sniffed the air, let out a low growl, and started pulling Claire in a specific direction. "What is it, boy?" Claire asked, her heart pounding as she followed him. Under the shed, the mother dog could sense her time was running out. Her body was weakening, her movements growing slower. She licked each of her puppies, her instincts urging her to comfort them even as she struggled to keep herself awake. Just as the darkness began to close in, a faint sound reached her ears, a human voice, growing louder with each passing moment. Claire's heart nearly stopped when she spotted the crumbling shed in the distance. It was barely visible through the blinding snow, but Jasper was pulling her toward it with an urgency she couldn't ignore. As they approached, Jasper began barking furiously, his breath visible in the icy air. Claire dropped to her knees and peered under the shed, her flashlight illuminating the heartbreaking scene. The mother dog lifted her head weakly, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. She let out a soft whine, as if pleading for help. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. "Hang on, girl. I've got you." As the days passed, Emily and Cooper's bond deepened. The baby's laughter filled the air whenever the horse approached, a sound that brought joy not only to Emily but also to everyone at the sanctuary. The other staff members began to notice the change too. "Emily, have you seen how he reacts to Cooper?" one of the caretakers asked. "It's like they understand each other." Emily nodded. "It's more than that. Cooper seems to know when the baby's struggling. Every time he's upset or in pain, Cooper comes to his side, almost like he's guarding him." The moments weren't lost on the doctors either. Dr. Harris, who had initially been skeptical of Cooper's presence, found himself reconsidering. During a routine checkup, he noticed something extraordinary. The baby's vitals were steadily improving. "It's subtle, but there's definitely progress," Dr. Harris told Emily. "His heart rate is more stable, and he's responding to stimuli faster. I can't say for certain, but I wonder if Cooper's presence is playing a role." Emily's heart swelled with hope. "He's doing more for my baby than I ever imagined," she said. Maybe this connection is exactly what he needed. One evening, as the sun set over the sanctuary, Emily sat outside with the baby in her arms and Cooper grazing nearby. She thought about the day she'd first brought her son here, overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty. Now, watching the way Cooper gently nuzzled the baby, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. "You've given us a second chance, Cooper," she said softly. "I don't know how, but you're helping him in ways I never could." That night, something remarkable happened. For the first time, the baby reached out toward Cooper, his tiny fingers brushing against the horse's mane. Emily gasped, her eyes filling with tears. It was a small movement, but it was the first voluntary gesture her son had made since birth. "You saw that, didn't you?" she whispered to Cooper, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's reaching for you." Word of the bond between the baby and Cooper began to spread. Visitors to the sanctuary watched in awe as the horse seemed to intuitively respond to the baby's needs, always calm and patient no matter the circumstances. The story even caught the attention of a local journalist, who came to the sanctuary to witness the connection firsthand. "It's like something out of a fairy tale," the journalist said after observing the two together. "I've never seen anything like it." The story was published, and soon the sanctuary was flooded with messages from people who had been touched by the tale. Some shared their own experiences with animals who had made a difference in their lives, while others simply offered words of encouragement for Emily and her son. As the weeks turned into months, the baby continued to defy expectations. His movements grew stronger, his responses more deliberate. Dr. Harris, once skeptical, now found himself eagerly monitoring the baby's progress. "I've seen cases where animals provide comfort," he told Emily during a checkup. "But this is something entirely different. It's as if Cooper is guiding his recovery." Emily smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "I don't know how to explain it, but I believe Cooper sees something in him. Something we might have missed." The sanctuary staff began calling the baby Cooper's boy, a nickname that brought smiles to everyone's faces. The bond between the two had become a symbol of hope, not just for Emily but for everyone who witnessed it. The next day, Sophia returned to the hospital with Buck by her side. The staff had reluctantly allowed him in after numerous assurances from Sophia about his impeccable behavior. Still, the sight of a horse walking calmly through the hospital corridors drew gasps, stares, and even a few chuckles. "He's here for the baby," Sophia explained to a curious nurse who held open a door for them. "He has a way of connecting." When they reached the neonatal unit, a hush fell over the room. The frail baby lay in his crib, surrounded by the steady hum of machines. The doctors and nurses observed skeptically as Sophia leads Buck to the edge of the crib, careful to keep him calm and gentle. His large, soulful eyes scanned the room before landing on the baby. He stood perfectly still, his ears flicking forward as if listening intently. Sophia reached out, placing a calming hand on Buck's neck. "Go ahead," she whispered. Buck extended his neck slowly, lowering his massive head toward the tiny infant. His warm breath ruffled the baby's blanket, and for a moment, everyone held their breath, unsure of what might happen. Then, something incredible occurred. The baby stirred. It was a small movement, a slight twitch of the fingers, but it was enough to send a ripple of astonishment through the room. The baby's eyes fluttered open, gazing weakly up at Buck. The horse responded with a soft nicker, a sound so gentle it seemed almost otherworldly in the sterile hospital setting. "Did you see that?" one of the nurses whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Dr. Patel, the lead physician, stepped forward, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. "This is unusual," he admitted, peering closely at the baby. "He hasn't opened his eyes in days." Buck remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on the baby. It was as though he understood the gravity of the moment. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell in time with Buck's rhythmic breathing, and his previously erratic heart rate began to stabilize on the monitor. Sophia wiped a tear from her eye. "I told you," she said softly. "He has a gift." Word of the extraordinary interaction spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members who had doubted Sophia's insistence on bringing Buck in now watched in awe as the baby continued to respond to the horse's presence. Over the next few hours, more signs of improvement appeared. The baby's grip strengthened, his breathing became less labored, and the pale color in his cheeks gave way to a faint blush of life. Dr. Patel called an emergency meeting with his team. "We need to rethink our approach," he said. "This baby isn't giving up, and neither should we." They adjusted his treatment plan, inspired by the baby's sudden resilience. Meanwhile, Buck visited daily, becoming a symbol of hope not just for the family, but for everyone in the neonatal unit. Parents of other critically ill infants began to request time with the miraculous horse, believing in the power of his calming presence. One evening, as Sophia sat beside the baby's crib with Buck at her side, the child's mother reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know how, but you and Buck have given us something we thought we'd lost hope." Sophia squeezed her hand gently. "It's not just us," she said. "Your baby has a strength all his own. Buck just helped him find it." The warmth of the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the stable yard as Caroline led the horse back to its stall. Miracle's gentle demeanor hadn't faltered all day, and the baby, now more relaxed and showing signs of improvement, seemed almost at peace in the presence of the horse. Doctors, therapists, and even hospital staff had taken notice of the peculiar connection. It wasn't just that the baby responded, it was how deeply and consistently she reacted. Her tiny hands, which barely had the strength to grasp before, now seemed to reach out whenever Miracle was near. Her faint coos and the smallest smiles melted hearts. By the end of that week, Caroline received a phone call she never expected. Dr. Sutherland was on the other end, his voice filled with a mix of professional excitement and genuine emotion. "Caroline," he said, "we've been documenting this interaction, and we believe Miracle's presence is having measurable therapeutic effects. It's like the baby is finding a reason to fight." Caroline leaned against the stall door, looking into Miracle's calm, soulful eyes. "He's living up to his name, isn't he?" she said softly. Word of the unusual bond between the baby and Miracle began to spread. Local media outlets ran features on the story, dubbing the horse the healing hoof. Families of other children with similar diagnoses began contacting the hospital, hoping for a sliver of the miracle that seemed to be unfolding. The hospital administration, initially skeptical, soon embraced the potential. They invited Caroline and Miracle to participate in a pilot program to explore equine-assisted therapy for other vulnerable patients. It was uncharted territory, but Caroline knew Miracle's gift was unique. She agreed, knowing it was a chance to give other families the same hope she had seen blossom in the baby's mother's eyes. Meanwhile, the baby's progress continued to astonish everyone involved. Her breathing became steadier, her heart rate stronger, and her reactions more engaged. The bond she shared with Miracle seemed to unlock something within her, a resilience that defied the grim prognosis she had been given. One evening, Caroline stayed late at the hospital stable, brushing Miracle's coat as the baby rested nearby in a specialized cradle. The sound of Miracle's breathing and the rhythmic swish of the brush filled the air. Suddenly, the baby let out a soft laugh, a sound so pure and unexpected that it brought tears to Caroline's eyes. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Miracle, her own laughter bubbling up. "She's laughing." The medical team took note of every milestone. While no one could fully explain the connection between the baby and the horse, it was clear that something profound was happening. Dr. Sutherland, who had been a skeptic at first, found himself drawn into the story. "There's more to healing than medicine," he admitted to Caroline one day. "Sometimes it's about finding the will to fight. And that's exactly what Miracle is giving her." But not everyone was convinced. A few members of the hospital board questioned the focus on a single patient and the resources being allocated to the unconventional therapy. "This isn't proven," one board member argued during a heated meeting. "We need evidence, not sentiment." Caroline felt her chest tighten as she listened to their doubts. She had always believed in Miracle's ability to connect with people, but now she felt the weight of proving his worth not just as a horse, but as a healer. Determined to fight for the baby and Miracle's role in her recovery, Caroline and Dr. Sutherland teamed up to gather as much data as possible. They documented every interaction, from the baby's growing responses to her improved vitals during and after sessions with Miracle. They also began reaching out to other families who had witnessed similar phenomena with animals, compiling a compelling case for the therapeutic potential of equine companionship. Caroline knew it wasn't just about the baby anymore. Miracle had the power to change lives, if only people would give him the chance. The next day, the doctors gathered the family to discuss the baby's prognosis. The hospital room was sterile and quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos of emotions swirling within. Dr. Evans, the lead physician, wore an expression of professional compassion as he spoke. "We've done everything we can," he began, his voice heavy. "But his condition is critical. The oxygen deprivation has caused significant brain damage. Even if he survives, the quality of life he'll have, it's unlikely he'll ever walk, talk, or function independently." Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked at her husband, Mark, who was staring down at his hands, silent but visibly trembling. Neither of them could speak. "We'll give you time to make your decision," Dr. Evans said gently before excusing himself. Outside the room, Sarah felt her knees give way, and she slumped into a chair in the hallway. Tears streamed down her face, her heart breaking under the weight of the impossible choice before them. Mark knelt beside her, holding her hands, his own tears falling freely. "There has to be another way," Sarah whispered. "We can't give up on him." "Not yet," Mark nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "If there's even the smallest chance, we have to fight for it." But what chance was there? The doctors had made it clear the damage was irreversible, the odds too slim. And yet, deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, might help them find another path. That evening, Sarah sat by her son's hospital bed, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. She thought back to the moment he was born, how perfect he had seemed despite his early arrival. She remembered his first cry, weak but full of life, and the way his tiny fingers had curled around hers. "You're stronger than they think," she whispered, brushing a hand over his soft, fragile head. "You've already made it this far." As she sat there, a memory surfaced. A conversation she'd had with her grandmother years ago. Her grandmother had told her about a special horse on their family farm, a mare named Grace. "That horse has a gift," her grandmother had said. "She knows when someone needs her, and she does everything she can to help." It had sounded like a tall tale at the time, but now, Sarah couldn't get the image of Grace out of her mind. The horse was still alive, living on the farm where Sarah had grown up. Could she really make a difference? It seemed impossible, but Sarah was desperate enough to try. The next morning, Sarah and Mark approached the doctors with an unusual request. "We'd like to take him to the family farm," Sarah said. "Just for a few days. There's someone there. Something there that might help." Dr. Evans frowned. "Mrs. Carter, I understand how difficult this is, but moving him in his condition could be dangerous. He needs constant medical care." "We'll arrange for a nurse to come with us," Sarah insisted. "We'll bring all the equipment he needs. Please just give us this chance." The doctors hesitated, but seeing the determination in Sarah's eyes, they eventually agreed. "It's unconventional," Dr. Evans said. "But if this is what you need to do, we'll support you." 2 days later, the Carters arrived at the farm. Grace was waiting in the pasture, her white coat gleaming in the sunlight. Sarah felt a wave of nostalgia and hope as she approached the horse, her son cradled in her arms. "Hey girl," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Do you remember me?" Grace lifted her head, her dark eyes filled with a calm, almost knowing intelligence. She took a few slow steps towards Sarah, her ears twitching as if she could sense the baby's presence. Sarah's heart pounded as she held her son closer. "This is Jacob," she whispered. "He needs your help." The mother stood at the window of the neonatal ward, her gaze fixed on the tiny, fragile figure in the incubator. Little Noah had been born prematurely, his underdeveloped lungs struggling with every breath. The doctors had been blunt. His chances of survival were slim, and even if he did make it, there could be severe complications. It felt like the walls of hope were closing in around her, suffocating her resolve. But something inside her refused to give up. Though the medical team gently broached the subject of letting Noah go peacefully, she couldn't bear the thought. He was her child, her miracle, and she'd fight for him until there was nothing left to fight for. Meanwhile, across town, at a quiet ranch nestled in the rolling countryside, a horse named Spirit roamed the pastures. Spirit was no ordinary horse. Known for his uncanny ability to connect with people, he had become the heart and soul of the ranch's therapeutic riding program. Veterans with PTSD, children with disabilities, and even those battling depression found solace in Spirit's calm presence and unshakable loyalty. The ranch owner, Maggie, often said Spirit had a gift, one that defied explanation. He seemed to sense when someone was in pain, whether emotional or physical, and he responded with an almost human-like understanding. "He's more than just a horse," Maggie would say. "He's a healer." One fateful afternoon, a family friend who volunteered at the ranch came to visit the hospital. She saw the despair etched into the mother's face and the fragile life struggling behind the glass of the incubator. After listening to the mother pour out her fears, the friend hesitated before speaking. "You know," she said carefully, "there's a horse at the ranch who's done incredible things. I've seen him calm children having panic attacks and bring smiles to faces that hadn't smiled in years. I know it sounds crazy, but maybe Spirit could help." The mother blinked in disbelief. A horse? How could a horse possibly help her baby? A tiny being tethered to machines and fighting for every breath. But then, what did she have to lose? Every conventional method had already been tried. Her heart, desperate for any glimmer of hope, clung to the suggestion like a lifeline. Arrangements were made. Maggie, hearing Noah's story, didn't hesitate for a moment. "If there's even a chance Spirit can help, we'll do it," she said. She worked tirelessly with the hospital administrators to ensure the visit was allowed, knowing how unconventional the idea was. Finally, the day came. The hospital's parking lot was an unusual sight, with Spirit standing calm and regal as the staff worked to bring Noah outside. It was a logistical challenge, moving the fragile baby and his equipment safely. Every step was watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism by the medical team. When they placed Noah, still in his incubator, on the grass near Spirit, an almost eerie silence fell over the crowd. Spirit, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, approached slowly. His large, gentle eyes locked onto the tiny figure in the incubator, and he lowered his head, exhaling softly. What happened next stunned everyone. Spirit stood perfectly still, his breath creating a soft fog against the incubator's glass. Noah, who had been restless and struggling just moments before, suddenly grew calm, his tiny fists unclenched, and his breathing, monitored closely by the machines, seemed to even out. The nurses exchanged incredulous glances, double-checking the readings. "His oxygen levels are stabilizing," one of them whispered. Spirit remained by Noah's side for over an hour, never moving, his eyes fixed on the baby. The mother watched with tears streaming down her face, a feeling she hadn't dared to embrace in weeks swelling within her hope. The horse's persistent nudging continued, growing more determined as if it sensed the urgency in the moment. The baby, who had been lying motionless for what felt like an eternity, stirred faintly. It was barely noticeable, a slight twitch of a hand, but it didn't escape Daisy's keen observation. She let out a soft whinny, her large, expressive eyes fixed intently on the tiny figure. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor standing beside her furrowed his brow, stepping closer to examine the infant. "It might have been reflexive," he said cautiously, though a flicker of hope danced in his voice. "But let me take another look." Eleanor didn't wait. She knelt beside Daisy, her hands trembling as she reached for the baby. The coolness of his skin, once a reminder of his fragile state, now seemed warmer. A subtle change, but enough to ignite a spark of hope in her chest. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're not giving up on you." As Eleanor cradled the baby, Daisy's demeanor shifted. The horse, who had been a source of calm strength throughout the ordeal, now exuded a palpable determination. She nuzzled the infant gently, her breath warm and steady against his tiny face. It was as if Daisy were lending her strength, willing the baby to fight for his life. The medical team, initially skeptical, began to take notice. One of the nurses observed the baby's heart monitor, her eyes widening. "His heart rate is stabilizing," she said, her voice laced with astonishment. "It's stronger than it's been all day." The room buzzed with cautious excitement. The doctors and nurses, who had prepared themselves for the worst, suddenly found themselves working with renewed vigor. They adjusted the baby's oxygen levels, monitored his vitals, and whispered words of encouragement as they moved swiftly to stabilize him. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief and disbelief. She glanced at Daisy, who stood unwaveringly beside her. "It's like she knows," Eleanor said softly. "She's not just here. She's helping him." The head doctor nodded, his skepticism giving way to awe. "There's something to be said about the connection between animals and humans," he admitted. "I've seen therapy animals work miracles, but this is extraordinary." The baby stirred again, this time with more intention. His tiny fingers curled around Eleanor's thumb, and she felt tears streaming down her face. "He's fighting," she said. "He's really fighting." Daisy let out another soft whinny, her eyes locked on the baby as if to say, "Keep going. You can do this." The hours that followed were tense yet filled with moments of hope. The medical team worked tirelessly, their efforts bolstered by the baby's gradual improvements. Daisy remained a steadfast presence, her calming influence palpable in the room. Whenever the baby seemed to falter, she would lean in, her gentle nuzzles and soft breaths seeming to coax him back to stability. By the end of the day, the baby's condition had shifted dramatically. His once labored breathing had steadied, and his skin had regained a healthier hue. The doctor, who had initially advocated for ending his care, approached Eleanor with a look of humility and wonder. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, "but he's made incredible progress. I've never seen anything like it." Eleanor looked down at the baby in her arms, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Neither have I," she said, her voice trembling. She turned to Daisy, stroking the horse's mane. "You've given him a second chance, girl. You've given all of us hope." The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Claire and her family. Each moment with Jacob was filled with both joy and heartache, as they tried to make the most of their time together. But the shadow of the doctor's words lingered heavily over them, and the pressure to make a decision loomed closer with every passing day. Despite the mounting tension, Claire couldn't ignore the change in Jacob since his encounter with Grace. For the first time, there was a spark of awareness in his eyes, a flicker of connection that had been absent before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to Claire it felt monumental. "I can't explain it," she told Michael one evening, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and desperation. "It's like he's trying to tell us something, like he's fighting." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe Grace sees something we don't. Animals have instincts. Sometimes they know things we can't understand." Determined to give Jacob every chance, Claire began researching equine therapy, diving into stories of children who had experienced miraculous improvements through their interactions with horses. The more she read, the more convinced she became that Grace might hold the key to reaching Jacob in a way no one else could. But the idea wasn't without its challenges. Jacob was fragile, and the risks of exposing him to such an unconventional approach were daunting. Still, Claire felt a pull she couldn't ignore, a feeling deep in her gut that Grace was meant to be part of Jacob's journey. She approached Dr. Bennett, one of the more open-minded physicians on Jacob's team, with her idea. "I know it sounds crazy," she said, her voice shaking, "but Grace is different. She already connected with Jacob once, and I think she can help him." Dr. Bennett frowned, clearly torn. "Claire, I admire your determination," she said gently, "but this is uncharted territory. There's no scientific evidence to support." "Please," Claire interrupted, her eyes brimming with tears. "All I'm asking for is a chance. If there's even the slightest possibility that this could help him, don't we owe it to him to try?" After much deliberation, Dr. Bennett agreed to a supervised session with Grace, provided every precaution was taken to ensure Jacob's safety. The family returned to the stable, where the staff had carefully prepared an area for the session. Grace stood in the center of the enclosure, her calm presence radiating a sense of serenity. As Michael carried Jacob into the enclosure, Claire held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Grace turned her head toward them, her ears perking up as if she recognized the fragile boy in Michael's arms. She let out a soft nicker, stepping forward with careful, deliberate movements. Jacob's head tilted slightly, his gaze locking onto Grace's dark, soulful eyes. It was the same connection Claire had seen before, but this time it felt even stronger, almost palpable. Grace lowered her head, nuzzling Jacob's tiny hand with a gentleness that brought tears to everyone's eyes. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the bond between the boy and the horse filling the air with a quiet magic. And then, something extraordinary happened. Jacob's fingers moved, just the slightest twitch, but enough to send a ripple of astonishment through the group. Claire gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she watched her son's tiny hand brush against Grace's muzzle. "He moved," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Michael, he moved." Michael's grip on Jacob tightened as he stared in disbelief. "I saw it," he said, his voice shaking. "He really moved." The breakthrough left everyone stunned, but it was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Claire and Michael arranged regular visits to the stable, each session bringing new moments of connection between Jacob and Grace. The horse seemed to intuitively understand Jacob's needs, adjusting her movements and behavior to match his fragility. Slowly but surely, Jacob began to show signs of progress. His responses grew more consistent, his movements more deliberate. The doctors, initially skeptical, were forced to reevaluate their assessments as the evidence of Jacob's improvement became impossible to ignore. Dr. Bennett, now a vocal advocate for the therapy, shared her observations with the rest of the medical team. "Whatever is happening here," she said, "we can't deny that it's having a positive impact. Grace is reaching him in a way that none of us could." The air in the hospital room grew thick with tension as Dr. Patel explained the situation to the family. There were charts, numbers, and cold medical terms that painted a grim picture. Anna's parents sat in silence, their hands clasped tightly together, their eyes hollow from weeks of sleepless nights. The nurses in the corner exchanged uneasy glances, their compassion held back by the protocols they were trained to follow. "You have to understand," Dr. Patel said, her voice steady but not unkind. "We've exhausted every option. Anna's brain activity has remained the same for weeks, and the machines are the only thing keeping her body alive." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Anna's mother broke into silent tears, her face buried in her hands. Her father's jaw tightened, his grief barely contained. In the hallway, other families passed by, their own burdens evident, but none as heavy as the one now weighing on Anna's parents. At that moment, a soft sound broke through the tension. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it caught everyone's attention. A gentle whinny echoed from the courtyard below, where the therapy animals were kept. Anna's mother looked up, her tear-streaked face showing a flicker of recognition. "It's Star," she whispered. Anna's horse. Star had been Anna's companion since her 8th birthday. A spirited mare with a fiery mane and a bond with Anna that defied explanation. When Anna fell ill, the family made arrangements for Star to visit the hospital courtyard, hoping her presence might bring comfort. But with Anna's condition worsening, even Star's visits had dwindled. Today, however, Star was restless. She paced the courtyard, her hooves clacking against the pavement, her head swinging toward the hospital windows as if searching for something. The staff in charge of the therapy animals had never seen her so agitated. "I think she knows," one of the handlers said, watching Star paw at the ground. "It's like she can feel what's happening." Back in the hospital room, Anna's mother clutched her husband's hand, a sudden resolve breaking through her grief. "We need to bring Star to Anna," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. Dr. Patel hesitated, glancing at the machinery keeping Anna stable. "I understand how much this means to you," she said, "but it's unconventional. Bringing an animal into a sterile environment." "It's not just an animal," Anna's father interrupted, his voice cracking. "It's Star. She's part of Anna's life, part of who she is. Please." There was a long pause, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the room. Finally, Dr. Patel nodded. "I'll authorize it," she said. "But we need to act quickly." As the arrangements were made, Star's restlessness grew. By the time the handlers brought her to the hospital's rear entrance, she was almost pulling against the lead rope, her movements sharp and purposeful. The staff scrambled to clear a path through the corridors, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. When Star was finally brought into Anna's room, the atmosphere shifted. The sterile environment seemed to soften, the hum of the machines momentarily forgotten. Star stepped cautiously into the room, her ears flicking at the unfamiliar sounds. But her focus remained on Anna, lying still in the hospital bed. The family stood back, holding their breath as Star moved closer. Her large, expressive eyes seemed to take in the scene, her nostrils flaring as she leaned down toward Anna's face. And then, something extraordinary happened. Star let out a low, soft nicker, a sound so gentle it seemed almost human. She nudged Anna's hand with her muzzle, her breath warm and steady. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Then, Anna's fingers twitched. The reaction was so small, so subtle, that at first, no one was sure if they'd imagined it. But when Star nickered again and nudged her hand once more, the movement was undeniable. "She moved," Anna's mother whispered, her voice trembling with hope. "Did you see that? She moved." Dr. Patel rushed to Anna's side, her professional demeanor slipping as she checked the monitors. The heart rate had changed, just slightly, but enough to signal something new. "There's a response," she said, her voice filled with astonishment. "It's faint, but it's real." Star nickered again, this time more urgently. She pressed her muzzle against Anna's hand, and this time, Anna's fingers curled ever so slightly around the horse's nose. The room erupted into tears and gasps of disbelief. Anna's mother clutched her chest, overwhelmed by the sudden wave of hope. Her father fell to his knees, his hands covering his face as he wept. "She knows," Anna's mother said, her voice breaking. "Star knows." The barn, which had always been a sanctuary of peace, now felt charged with an almost mystical energy. Charlotte carried the baby to the paddock where Luna stood, her gaze steady and unwavering. The horse seemed to sense the weight of the moment, shifting slightly but holding her ground as Charlotte approached. "Okay, Luna," Charlotte murmured, her voice shaking. "This is Samuel. I don't know why, but something tells me you can help him." The baby, bundled tightly against the chill, stirred in Charlotte's arms, letting out a soft whimper. Luna's ears twitched at the sound, and she lowered her head, her velvety muzzle inches from the baby's tiny face. Charlotte held her breath, her heart pounding as she watched the interaction. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if compelled by some unseen force, Luna nickered softly, her warm breath brushing against Samuel's cheeks. The baby let out a small cry, his eyes fluttering open for the first time in hours. Charlotte gasped, tears spilling down her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's responding." News of the miraculous moment spread quickly among the staff and volunteers at the sanctuary. By the end of the day, everyone had heard about Luna's inexplicable connection to Samuel. Dr. Harris, still skeptical but intrigued, came to observe. Charlotte was in the paddock again, cradling Samuel while Luna stood watchfully nearby. "What exactly are we looking at here?" Dr. Harris asked, his arms crossed. "I don't know," Charlotte admitted, "but every time she's near him, he seems calmer. His breathing improves and it's like he knows she's here." Dr. Harris stepped closer, watching as Luna nuzzled Samuel gently. The baby responded with a soft coo, his tiny hands twitching as though trying to reach for her. "It's fascinating," Dr. Harris said finally. "There's no scientific explanation for this, but there's clearly a bond." Over the next few days, Charlotte and Luna became inseparable in their care for Samuel. Whenever the baby's condition worsened, Charlotte would bring him to Luna, and the horse would somehow calm him, her presence almost magical. Even the doctors at the hospital began to take notice. Dr. Patel, the lead pediatrician, visited the sanctuary one evening, her curiosity piqued by the reports. "I have to admit, I was skeptical," she said, watching Luna from a distance. "But there's something about this horse that's different." Charlotte nodded, her eyes fixed on Luna. "She's not just a horse. She's something else. I don't know how to explain it, but she's keeping him alive." As Samuel's condition gradually stabilized, the bond between him and Luna deepened. Charlotte began documenting their interactions, taking photos and videos to share with the medical team. One video, showing Luna softly whinnying as Samuel reached out toward her, went viral online, capturing the hearts of millions. People from around the world began sending messages of support, their words filled with hope and wonder. "Luna is a miracle," one message read. "She's proof that love can transcend anything, even species." But not everyone was convinced. Some criticized the sanctuary, accusing Charlotte of using Samuel's plight for attention. The backlash stung, but Charlotte refused to let it deter her. "This isn't about publicity," she said in an interview. "It's about saving Samuel's life. And if Luna is the key, then I'll fight for her as much as I fight for him." The pressure mounted as Samuel's case drew more attention. Medical experts, journalists, and even skeptics arrived at the sanctuary, eager to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Charlotte felt the weight of their scrutiny, but Luna remained unfazed, her calm presence a constant reminder of what truly mattered. One afternoon, as a storm brewed on the horizon, Samuel's condition took a sudden turn. He developed a high fever, his tiny body racked with chills. Charlotte rushed him to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to stabilize him. "This is it," Dr. Patel said grimly. "If he doesn't improve soon, we'll have no choice but to—" "No," Charlotte interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not giving up on him. He needs Luna." Dr. Patel hesitated, her professional demeanor wavering. "You really believe that horse can help him?" "I don't just believe it," Charlotte said. "I know it." When Samuel was stable enough to be moved, Charlotte convinced the hospital to let Luna visit. It was an unprecedented request, but Dr. Patel, moved by Charlotte's conviction, made it happen. The sight of the horse in the hospital courtyard drew a crowd, and as Charlotte carried Samuel out to meet her, the tension was palpable. Luna stood tall and regal, her mane rippling in the wind as Charlotte approached. The moment Samuel was placed near her, his cries softened, his feverish body relaxing visibly. Luna nickered softly, her breath warming the air around him. Dr. Patel watched in astonishment as Samuel's heart rate steadied, his oxygen levels improving almost instantly. "This is extraordinary," she murmured.